This is Karen with NewClevelandRadio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze. And today we are starting a new series. We plan to have a quarterly, but it may change a little bit as we go forward. But we are working with Hospice of the Western Reserve. And I want to thank them so much for being a huge part of my life because after my mother passed away and I came back to Cleveland, um, I needed support. In the hospice group that we used up in Michigan didn't provide the support like Hospice of the Western Reserve. And I will tell you that within weeks, I started to feel human again because the feelings I was going through were real. And the people at Hospice of the Western Reserve just made me feel so comfortable. It was okay to grieve. So today we're starting out with Jody Coulter. She's a bereavement coordinator at Hospice of the Western Reserve. And I know when you hear the word bereavement, you probably think that we're going to be sitting here crying the whole time. But one of the things I learned that even when you're grieving, you can still laugh, you can still smile, you can still feel, and that's what this is all about. So, again, Jody, thank you for joining us.
You're
And
welcome for having me.
tell us a little bit about your background. What made you decide to do something that many of us would be running in the opposite direction?
I always say that all of us have gifts, right? And we're all pulled towards something that's a gift. Um, as a child, I learned about death at a young age with my great aunt dying, and then lost some friends as a teenager. I come from a large, older family, so I had a lot of losses in my life. I was never afraid of talking about death, and we talked about it very openly. Back in the 80s, my grandmother was put, after a stroke, was put on hospice. And it was a very different mindset where she was at. And I knew that as somebody who always wanted to help other people, that my experience would kind of help me walk alongside others as they go through their grief, because I've had so many different types of losses
Well, one of the things I do know, um, you had a very loving mother, very supportive mother. I've heard a lot about her. And even before she passed, um, I followed your sister and uh, the beautiful love your whole family has. So for you, I think this is a very special place because you're taking what you learned, how you were nurtured, and you're sharing that with others. So tell us a little bit about your educational background when you decided, you know, to go to college or get additional training. Was this what you had in mind that someday I'm going to be doing this?
never, never. When I went to college, I was looking at child psychology, and someone introduced me to the concept of music therapy. I suddenly found myself changing schools, going for my bachelor's in music therapy, and I thought I'd be working with adolescents. My internship turned out to be working in a hospital, which led me to the oncology unit, which kind of opened that door. At the same time, my grandmother had a stroke.
Wow.
So it was opening doors of the love and compassion and the challenges that the families face as they go through grief, because grief starts at the day of diagnosis or the day of a significant event that changes your life. That's when our grief begins. So I finally, after 10 years of looking for a job at Hospice of the Western Reserve, I had worked in a general hospital for years in skilled nursing and oncology, um, and adult mental health, a mental health unit. And one day when my father-in-law was on hospice, I said to my husband, this is really where my passion is. I would sit with him and play my guitar and sing to him to calm him. And he said, then you need to call. You need to call. And ironically enough, the person who called me was the director of the expressive therapies team, who was a college friend who then said my new supervisor would be the gentleman I just met at a funeral I played for when
Wow.
I was working at the hospital, Chuck Barron's. Um, and the day my father-in-law died, I got the call to come in for an interview. It was just all just meant to be, like 10 years in the waiting, timing is everything. And
Absolutely.
yeah, it's been a good fit. It's been 21 years. It's got to be a good fit.
Well, the first time I became aware of hospice was when my father got ill in 2003 into 2004. And I had a mindset like many people out there, hospice means dad's going to die immediately, because that's the only thing I knew. And my father had a phenomenal caregiver that came through the hospice group that was serving him and my mother. They were
Mhm.
wonderful. I wish I would have had that experience with my when it was my mom's turn. But what we learned was how comfortable they made not only my dad feel, but my mother. And this one hospice individual would call my brothers and me separately because I have a brother in New York, one in California, I'm here in Ohio, and she would call and give us updates and then put my dad on the phone. And I kept thinking, he sounds fine. I mean, like, what is all this hospice about? But she explained it.
Mhm.
So tell me a little bit about this supporting both the patient and the family. I mean, it's a you're saying different things and supporting in different ways, correct?
Well, we believe, our hospice philosophy is about living the best life you can while you're with us. And some people will be on hospice for a couple of years, really. We don't know. We can say we can see signs of someone of a disease progressing and some changes coming along, but we can't determine an end date, right?
Right.
Um, and I think one of the biggest mistakes people make is that they wait too long to get hospice. Because as I said previously, our grieving begins at the time of a diagnosis, whether that's a terminal illness or progressive disease of some sort. We begin grieving the loss of our assumptive world. So when the hospice team comes in, you have a social worker, you can have spiritual care. Ours offers expressive therapies. We have volunteers who can help the family, support the family. If they have things to do, if they need to step out, we can have someone who can sit with them. We provide bereavement services. So in their anticipatory grief, while the patient is still with them, if they're really struggling or there's other family issues that are happening that are the family's really struggling with, we can come in as bereavement coordinators and provide that support. Or if they've had other losses close to this loss, which in this last year we've seen a
Right.
lot of loss, and a lot of families losing multiple family members. So bringing hospice in is really not just a support for the family. People think we come in there to give them medicine and make things happen quickly. We do not hasten death. That is not what hospice is about. Hospice is about making you comfortable, giving your family the peace and the comfort and the guidance to know, what to expect, how to approach certain things, how to have conversations that can be really difficult. And that's why bringing a hospice team in early is better than waiting.
Now, does Hospice of the Western Reserve also support palliative care?
Yes, we have a navigator program. Um, yeah, so we have a team that you can speak with about the navigator program for somebody who's on palliative care, who's still seeking treatment. Um, and then that palliative team might say, it's time for hospice. Or they might say it's time to graduate and go live life. And we've had to say that on hospice too. We have had patients make sure that says, I graduated hospice.
I love that. That
Yeah,
is a
yeah, we love it too.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. Because I know when my mother first got ill, um, actually the doctor, the day he left her out of the hospital, the first thing he said to us, take her home and she'll die within a day or two.
Mhm.
And so my brother and I took her home and we sat by her bedside and we kept waiting and waiting. And my mother was telling us jokes and laughing and asking for watermelon. And I just looked at my brother and I said, well, thank God the doctor's wrong
Mhm.
but what do we do? Um, and he said, we got to seek out some help. And that's what we did. And we didn't think of hospice immediately, but one of my school age friends uh, worked for a hospice group.
Mhm.
And she knew I was in town and she called me. She said, let us just come out and talk to you. We see this all the time. And we were so grateful that they did because they put us at ease. They let us know that, you know what, that doctor had no idea. And your mom could be here another day, another week, a couple months. She could be here a year from now. Um, and you have to prepare. So I like that comment you made, that we need to think about it even way before it ever happens.
Right. And one of the things, whether it's somebody who has maybe Alzheimer's or some form of the dementia or ALS or any kind of a cancer that keeps spreading, there's something, he's a minister and a writer and a grief therapist. He's probably in his 90s now. His name is Doug Manning. And he shared the term the quiet sorrows. And those quiet sorrows are the things you lose as a family member as your loved one is declining. And Doug talks about this in his book called, I think it's called Share My Lonesome Valley. It's about being a caregiver long term. So families could be already to a point of possible burnout, dealing with this disease that's been going on for 8 or 9 years,
Right.
possibly, right? And the grief that's associated with that. When he talks about the quiet sorrows, that one really touched me personally because I live with someone with a neuromuscular disease, and it was, people come up and they say, oh, how's your husband doing, or how's your mom doing? Everybody wants to know how the person who's ill is doing, and the person who's doing the caregiving giving is kind of like off to the side, and people don't recognize how are you doing. They don't recognize like this picture behind me, being
Right.
walk in the woods and hold hands, right? Being able to go to the places you've always wanted to go, being able to have the conversations you want to have, those quiet sorrows that the caregiver keeps in their heart that aren't recognized. And that's a big part of grief. And when I share that with people who are grieving, they can really relate to it. Like, oh, that's it. That's it. So, and all of that starts when the team comes in. We're not just focusing on the patient, we're focusing on the family too, because they have quiet sorrows. They're trying to figure out, how do I say goodbye to this person who's been a part of my life?
Right. And it's interesting, and I want our listeners to know this. Not every hospice group is the same.
No,
They have, I think you build on the same concepts, but depending on who's in that group
right,
makes a huge difference. And not putting down the group that came in and took care of my mother. Um, it just could have been the situation. We never saw the same nurse or aide twice. And whenever I had to call in, I never spoke to the same person twice. And that made me feel very uncomfortable because I was the primary caregiver, even though um, we had hired caregivers to be in the house. They weren't able to give my mother medications. They
right,
could just observe and take care of her daily needs. And I didn't realize how alone I was. And I think that's really important for people to understand. And, you can change services in the middle if you need to. You got to do what's right for you
right,
and for your loved one.
right,
And that's why I found it strange um, when I came back and I found out that uh, your hospice group is there for people after they've had that loss. And it was like, really? I'm on this island all by myself. My brother went on the West Coast, went on the East Coast. I'm here. Um, and they're guys. I'm a girl. It was my mother, and our loss was different. Our grieving was different. And I didn't understand that until one of your representatives sat me down and just had a conversation. What was it like growing up? You know, how
How
did your mother react
long-
to your brothers and how did she react to you? And it was like, oh, that's okay that they think differently. So, my big question, and I sort of threw this at you yesterday in a text, what's it like to be working with families and then come home?
Mm.
And is there a burden on your shoulders that you're still trying to work things out? Or can you walk in your house and say, I'm okay for now? I don't have to think about that.
I think it depends where you are in life. I had to learn early on when I was an intern and my first patient was visioning as I walked in on him. We wrote a song for his family. This is back when in my mid 20s, and he died the next day. When I came to work, I was so upset that I found out he died. And then at that moment, I had to learn the personal and professional boundary because if somebody dies, we still have to be able to go on with our day, right?
Right.
So that was one lesson. And then I come to hospice and I'm doing this work and I'm hearing these stories and I can understand and be compassionate. But of course I've had a lot of losses, but I haven't had every loss that everybody's had, right? You can't possibly have every loss
Sure.
everybody's had. But when my mother died, that was eye-opening for me. And those days I would go home exhausted, but at the same time, there was something that just gave me this deeper sense of compassion and patience and understanding to sit with people. And I could sit with them in their silence, I could sit with them in their tears. And then I would go home and I would be tired and rest and do whatever it was I did to distract myself. So that was the other lesson is that now I was living a lot of what I was hearing.
Sure.
Because I always say there's one that pulls the rug out from underneath you, and she was it. But on a regular day, on a normal day, I feel like, I can go home and I engage in my life. I take care of myself. Self-care is priority. I'm a personal trainer as well, so I exercise a lot. I spend time with my dogs. I play the piano. I ride my bike, spend time with my family or my friends. I love to dance. So we know in hospice, we're always encouraging each other to take care of ourselves. That self-care is imperative in order to be able to sit with someone in their sadness. And there are days, there was a day a couple weeks ago, phone call after phone call after phone call. Just, I went home like, wow, it gives you perspective.
Right. Exactly.
Gives you perspective, especially when you're hearing about young kids losing their parents and having not been able to visit with them during this pandemic. Gives you
That's
perspectives, gives you something to be grateful for. You
that
know,
and that had to have, this past year had to have been very hard on many, many people. Uh, I lost a couple of distant family members. Um, but when I heard that, they were in nursing care and they got the virus and, their kids couldn't even do Zoom calls because there wasn't enough staff to do that in the nursing homes. My heart went out to them because as difficult as it was for me to spend 2.5 months next to my mom, move up to Michigan and be there 24/7, I wouldn't trade that for anything.
right,
It was like I got to be there. I got to know her a little bit better. Um, and I knew when she was ready. And when she was ready, uh, I'm not going to say I was, but I was prepared.
right.
And that was because I allowed myself to reach out to people who could help get me through this. So you wrote a poem about your mom,
Mm.
and um, you know, your sister is always posting a picture of your mom doing something, and especially with the Cleveland Indians. Yeah, and I'm so I'm so impressed about her love for the Indians because my son works for the Indians, and so
Oh,
I feel like I've really got this bond here. Um, but there was never a picture where she didn't have a big, huge smile on her face. And you and your sister seem to have taken after her in that way.
We try. Yeah.
Yeah.
She made us laugh for sure. You know, you have to find a way. I learned that my heart just had this giant hole, a gaping hole, and I kept trying to fill it. And I've heard people say this for years, you know. And then one day it came to me that I can't fill it. Her light is meant to shine through that hole. It'll never heal. It's gonna have a little scar,
Yep.
but her light will shine. And now after is it 4 years, I'm able to talk about her and not cry all the time.
Well, both of us lost our mothers within a couple of weeks of each other. And, I was following your sister, and it was like, here I was grieving over what I was going through. And then I started grieving for your family. And that's when I realized, there's different forms of grief. Nobody had ever explained that to me. I thought heartbreak grief was going to be the same no matter what. But the reality of it is, it's not. And one minute you can be grieving, and the next minute you can have this huge smile on your face, and it's okay.
Right.
So, are you willing to share the poem with us?
Sure. Can I tell you a little bit about where it came from? Just real quick.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I had, I won't go into all the details, but I went to my first party 3 months after my mother's death. And I hadn't been feeling good because of things that happened prior in the day. Um, and uh, my heart rate kept going up. We couldn't get my heart rate down. It was 109, wouldn't come down, just didn't feel good. My blood pressure shot up. And so I had my friend come over. It was really late at night, so she could sit with me, and my husband was there. And I said, I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't know what's happening. And I looked at both of them and I was like, this is my grief. This is how my grief is playing right now. And the next morning, this just came.
Okay.
It's called She Waits. She's everywhere, waiting for her moment, the moment when you are most vulnerable. She lurks in the shadows and waits. She hides in every fiber, every cell of your being. In the mind, she caresses the landscape of every peak and valley. She waits. She calls on you when you least expect it, and without a moment's thought, you respond. The tears flow, the heart aches, the body remembers, and you sit, numb, tired, exhausted, unaware of her presence. You wonder. You question your sanity. Your mind has lost its memory, and tasks seem more complicated. Your body acts as if you've just gotten off a roller coaster, spinning, your heart's racing, confused. She sits, she waits. She knows there's more. She is grief. So just when you think you're starting to move forward and people say, I thought I was doing so well, and now I'm crying all the time, it's because she waits, you know. Grief is in the songs, the scents, the sights we see, the people we meet, and it catches us off guard, those grief triggers. So yeah, a lot of people found comfort and connection with that.
Well, and one of the things that I have found is that in the beginning, I didn't allow myself to truly grieve. Number one, I was taking care of my mom. Um, and uh, what happened with my mom was she had a stroke and went blind, but she thought she could see. And because she was 96 years old and prior to this stroke had shown no real signs of dementia, the doctors told us you cannot tell her she's not seeing what she says she sees. If she
Right.
says she can see, you go along with it, and that was difficult. Was grieving for her loss of sight, but yet in the beginning she was happy as could be, and she told me one day she didn't like the color of my blouse, and I said, "What don't you like about the color?" And she said, "I like you better in blue." And I wasn't wearing a blue blouse. So I thought, oh God, she can see, and out of that sadness I was feeling, I was overjoyed until I realized that was what she thought she was saying. And what I learned along the way was it's okay to feel what you feel. You can't, there's no timeline. And I don't think I will ever get over my mother's passing,
Mhm.
but I don't live it every day. And that's the difference in the grief that, like you said, a song, a walk, a bird, little things can bring it back. And I think that's, mom's way of saying, hey, I'm still here. I'm within you.
I think one of the things early in our grief is we're afraid that we're going to forget the person. We're going to forget their voice. We're going to forget, I miss my mom's hugs. She was the best hugger, just her gentle touch like that we can't get. I can imagine it, but I'll never feel that. And I will never, ever forget her. I haven't forgotten all those other people I've lost in my life.
Right.
But that's our fears. We want to cling to that. So we don't want to move forward. We kind of keep ourselves contained in this grief. And in that time, people are all around us and wanting to help us and bringing us food and keeping us busy. But give that about 6 weeks and you see things change. And then you give that about 3 months and things really change and your friends get back to life. And that's when you realize life is not normal. There's all these firsts you're facing, and that comes with every season. It comes with every holiday. It could be going to the store. There's all these things that we face as we go um, through our grief. So it changes. So when we think we've gotten through, okay, got through the first holiday, got through my first Father's Day, then we forget, oh, wait, Halloween's coming and that was his favorite holiday. So there's these triggers that come and we don't know how we're going to respond. And a lot of times people, Karen, they get anxious the week before. We get anxious anticipating that day, what it's going to feel like, what it's going to be like. And we all do go
Right.
through playing through that day from the very beginning, right?
Right.
And we make it through it, we walk through it. And the important thing is to find somebody that you can talk to about it.
So, how did somebody find a person like you at the Hospice of the Western Reserve?
Well, with our patients, we provide support to our patients and their families. So they immediately are introduced to us, about us, I should say, when they come onto our services. And then we provide support one-on-one, however they want. We send a mailing called About Grief, and has articles and book reviews and all the groups that we offer. So that's to our patients' families. They have that available to them however they would like to use it. But to the community, we try to meet their need through support groups, through continuing education for professionals. Um, I love to speak at memorial services. I'm speaking at a Rainbow Bridge for pet loss. We also do crisis intervention. We do support groups in schools when there's been a few losses of
Right.
students have had several losses. We do support in the schools. Crisis intervention, did I say that?
Yep.
So if they call our agency, um, they can, or look us up at hospicewr.org. We have services that are available to the community as well. At this time, we have the groups that are available to the community, not so much the one-on-one, but we can help them find a resource. Even if somebody's living in another state, we help them find, if their loved one was here, but they live in California, we try to help them find the support. Or we can speak with them on the phone as well.
And that is key because individuals like yourself, not only have you faced this firsthand, you've been working in the industry for a long time. Um, and counseling is great, but sometimes we choose a psychologist who maybe just doesn't have the experience that you do. Um, and I found that for myself too. The first therapist I went to, um, it just wasn't helping. And she even admitted it. And I was so grateful when she said, Karen, you need grief therapy. I looked at her and I said, oh, no, no. Well, I'll be a good girl. Tell me what to say. And she said, that's not what it's about. And when I went for grief therapy, and I went for 3 months, um, my last day, I chose, not the therapist, because I looked at the therapist at the time and I said, you know what? I know you'll be here if I need you, but now it's my turn to take that walk. And, um, there are days that I think, maybe I should make a phone call, but then I find that pathway. And it's because of the support that your organization provides, um, and the community work that you do. So, if there was one tool that you could tell us to put into our toolboxes right now, can you think of one?
I'd have to say, and I just wrote, I have it right here, so I would remember this about grief is moving through grief. One of the things that I tell people, and I know it was my saving grace when my mom passed away, is to move. Sometimes it's you just have to get out of your house and walk down your driveway if you have a mailbox at the end of the driveway. And if you don't, just walk down your driveway. Just move. Let your body move and feel because as we grieve, we close ourselves in, we go inward and we lament and we reflect and we remember, right?
Right,
Deal with that wound. And then when we open our arms up or we start to move our body, we start to feel life enter us. It helps our mood, it helps our circulation. So for someone, it might be going for a bike ride. It might be just a casual walk around the block. It might be like me, circuit training and taking 30 minutes where I just focused on me. My mind couldn't wander. I had to focus on my movements and what I was doing and, paying attention to form and things like that so I wouldn't get hurt. So it was a break from my emotional pain.
right.
So my big thing is to keep moving. How are you moving? Are you getting out? Are you riding that bike that you have and you live right next to the towpath? Are you going for a walk down the street? Are you calling a friend? Are you, maybe they do Tai Chi, maybe they do yoga. So keep yourself moving because then in the end, and eating healthy, because then in the end, when you've made it through, when you got to this other side of your grief, then you don't have the laments to deal with of,
Oh,
oh my gosh, I didn't do anything. And then in my grief, I put on weight or I don't feel healthy, or now you have your own health issues, right? Um, so yeah, it's always, are you drinking your water? Because we tend to dehydrate as
right.
right? And are you moving?
Well, I think movement is really important. And
Dancing is movement, whatever.
that was something that I picked up. And so my mother was living in, um, they had independent living, assisted living, and then nursing. So she was living in the independent living when this happened. And we were grateful that they let us not have to move her, that we could stay in her apartment with her. But every afternoon, about 3 o'clock, um, I would have one of the care workers know that I was going to go take a walk. And I would walk around outside. I would see some of her friends, some of her neighbors. They all wanted to know how she was doing. And it gave me a chance to talk about her, but through their eyes, which was so refreshing because I had never done that before. When I would come to visit her, I came to visit her and I had blinders on. I didn't care about the other people there. But now I was starting to care. And some of them were telling me their stories, their fears, their happy thoughts. And so when I went back to my mom, I would then share all the gossip that was going on. And that took a lot of stress off of me. And I realized after I did come back home, I had to keep, like you said, moving. I didn't realize that's what I was doing, but um, I just jumped into project after project. And then when I saw that I was wearing myself thin, then it was a time to sit back and go, okay, she wouldn't want this for me. But what she'd want for me is to do the things that I like to do.
And
And
you,
that's what I did.
yeah, because you need to know when to rest too.
Yes.
Yeah, you need to know when to rest and when to tune out. um, the, trying to find that balance is hard because I think, especially in the beginning, there's this angst, there's this anxiety, and we don't know what to do with the nervous energy. I was also a caregiver at the time my mom died from my uncle. And then he died 8 months later. And I remember pacing my house, walking from one end to the other, going, I'm supposed to be doing something. What am I doing? What am I supposed to be doing? I couldn't sit still. And then I realized, oh, I'm so used to taking care of him and checking on him. And then had the grief of my mom. It just snowballs. So our grief can be complicated by multiple losses or our own health change. So yeah, finding something that brings you a little bit of joy. And you don't always enjoy it, right?
Right.
Especially in the beginning, you're not always enjoying what you're doing. It's kind of like that fake it till you make it. Just move.
Well, I am so glad that we are starting these
And like
conversations
I said, being out
because,
in nature.
yeah,
Hmm?
I'm so
What's that?
glad that we're starting these conversations because so many people are out there and they're all alone, or at
Right.
least they think they are. And we want them to know they're not.
Right. And you do feel alone as you go through this. And
Yes.
I'm a little, I like to share it with people because I want them to know when you realize you're not alone, it gives you this sense of, I don't know, confidence or freedom to say, oh, I can talk about this and it's okay. I can talk that it's hard for me to get out of bed every morning. It's okay because that's part of grieving. That's for some people, I'm like, hey, you got up, you brushed your teeth, you're having a good day. You know?
Well, we have to pat ourselves on the back for each step we take.
Absolutely.
And, you know, I always laugh at the fact that my parents were not necessarily patters. They didn't pat us on the back. They gave us lots of hugs. They let us know they loved us, but it wasn't always about good job, okay? Because certain things you were just supposed to do naturally. And when I found that I was taking those steps forward, I thought, you know what? My mom's not here to tell me she loves me. She's not here to give me a hug. But if I can pat myself on the back, then I know I'm taking the right steps forward. And so we all can create our own way of getting through the grief.
Right.
But let's not be surprised if it hits us on an anniversary date, on a holiday, or like it did for me a couple weeks ago, walking into the grocery store and swearing I saw both my mother and mother in law shopping together. And I
Wow.
just stood there and it was like, this can't be. But these two women were actually shopping together. And I swear they looked like my mother and mother in law. And I thought, that's probably a sign that, I love them and I'm thinking about them and they were good friends. So what a wonderful way to look at a vision like that. So we're going to do another one of these shows in about 3 months. I don't know if we're going to be talking about bereavement, but I know it'll be right before the holidays. And I think that's when a lot of us start to um, worry about how we're going to get through the days. And
Right.
I look forward to talking to you and others from Hospice of the Western Reserve because you have a great organization. But you did mention volunteers. How
Mhm.
do people volunteer?
Oh, we can volunteer in a lot of different ways. We have pet therapy programs where people bring their pets in for patients. We have volunteers who will sit with our patients. We have volunteers that help us in clerical ways. I have a volunteer who helps me make bereavement calls because there's so many people I'm trying to reach. And we call our family members initially. And if they've decided, yeah, I'm doing good, I don't need anything right now, we call again in 4 months just to make sure. And that I use a volunteer. We all use our bereavement volunteers a little differently. So I use a volunteer who makes those phone calls for me. We have volunteers who might help with a support group, but each bereavement coordinator is a little different in how they use that. So if somebody wanted to check in, and again, go to our hospicewr.org and look up volunteer opportunities. We're always looking for our volunteers. We'd be lost without our volunteers. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like something many of us could do. and will feel very comfortable doing because just making somebody's day just a little bit better. That's
Makes
what it's
such
all
a
about.
difference, doesn't it? You
Absolutely.
know, there's there's a song lyric I love by this guy. His name is Gary Burr. He's a songwriter, and the song's out. It's a country song. I've heard the profession the artist version, I should say, but his version, it's about a story of a young boy who's always afraid of losing his father, and it's their story of growing up. And the father dies. But the bridge of the song I share with so many people, when we think about the loved one who has died and we think about where life is leading us, the bridge of Gary's song is every person carves a spot and fills the hole with a light. And I pray someday I might light as bright as he. All we ever want is to let the light of our loved ones shine through us and to share that love or the lessons we learned. We didn't always have a good relationship with the person who died, right?
Right.
But whatever we took away from that relationship, that's how we walk through this journey. You know, that's how we walk the path and companion others who might be friends or neighbors who are a few months down the road and struggling. So, and then with the holidays coming, like you're saying, it's a difficult time. So every person carves a spot.
Well, I encourage everyone who is listening to reach out to the Hospice of the Western Reserve. If you're not in this area, there's other hospice groups in other cities and states. Um, we don't have to take the journey alone. And, it's one step at a time. And you never know what you're going to need in the future. Thank you, Jody, so much for joining us, and we will stay in touch. Enjoy this hot, humid day. Um, it's a scorcher for July. This is what we expect in August in Cleveland, Ohio, but uh, it's still a beautiful day. Thank you very much. Have a great one.